Hi, this is the Unwilling Pawn. Continuing with my 9/11 conspiracy series and the sub-series War in Afghanistan. This arm of the 9/11 conspiracy theory proof. So War in Afghanistan, and we've covered many aspects of it. Two main big parts of it, and all the details we discussed in the previous videos. War in Afghanistan sub-series, and drugs. Part one of that I discussed, the black market and touched on Afghanistan, Colombia. But now I'm really going to get into the CIA, drug trafficking, that foundation, where that came from. The truth is that, I'll mention this again at the end of this paragraph, but truth is I could have gotten... This is a project in and of itself. It's a section of the library, if there was a library for this kind of thing. It's a section of a library dedicated just to all of the proof and evidence of CIA being involved and the federal government being involved. Federal government and other governments involved, United States government in general, whether it's state government or federal government, police being involved in the corruption in the drug trafficking. Not just some corrupt police officers, all the way to the top. All the way to the top. The president involved, the CIA involved, especially the CIA. And I'll mention this point at the very end, but I'll discuss it in detail. But basically, it's ingrained into the economy. It didn't have to be, but we'll discuss this in more detail at the end. Basically, I just want to point out that, I'm just scratching the surface here. It's just one summary and one angle of that drug trafficking. There's certain facts that Michael Rupert thought were most significant. And obviously, from the 9/11 angle, as it relates to 9/11, or giving that foundation as to the CIA's and their drug trafficking operations. So, in order that I can lay a foundation, I will rely heavily on the compilation of research from the intelligence community raised investigative reporter and former Los Angeles Police Department narcotics officer, Michael Rupert, in his documentary film 9/11 Truth and Lies, the documentary I have already referenced and relied upon. There are many other sources that can confirm that the CIA is heavily into drug trafficking from Latin America, primarily cocaine, and laundering the money through Wall Street, as that is common knowledge to the initiated. I chose Mike Rupert's documentaries on the subject matter because they're available, because I trust him, because he was a narcotics officer, because he was raised with a mother and father who were in the CIA and NSA when the agencies were in their infancy, well before the time of John F. Kennedy, because he had a secret clearance due to his intelligence community contacts, because he was shot at and forced out of Los Angeles Police Department for refusing to be recruited by the CIA to become a drug lord. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to record him as a drug lord, and he showed the integrity to not give in to that, because he is thorough in his investigative journalism, because he has integrity and wouldn't have come out with the information if he was a bad person. At great personal risk, because you don't want to piss off the CIA and NSA and powerful organizations and powerful people. And he did that. He spoke truth to power. Because I can recognize a fellow truth seeker when I see one. Someone who cuts through all of the bullshit and says, you know what? This is all lies being taught to us. We're all being fed lies. And I'm not going to have it. I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I like those kinds of people. And I see that in Mike Rupert. He has always been that way. And of course, the hard work involved. So look at people like Alex Jones. I mean, frauds like him, disinformation agents like him. Either he speaks complete lies, slander, stupidity, or the truth that he does tell, it's because of truthers like Mike Rupert. Michael Rupert is one of those guys who did actually investigative journalism. He doesn't just say anything. He doesn't have some radio show where he's just making noise, fear-mongering, scare-mongering, lying, slandering, telling 1,000 lies. And, I remember one case about Alex Jones that he was doing some kind of fear-mongering, saying that martial law was about to happen, and there were some people in Texas who actually listened to him and sold their house or something. I mean, it's ridiculous nonsense, the kind of stuff that he's done throughout his career. Alex Jones, I mean. So people like him, they obviously are there to discredit the truth. They're there to discredit the Truther movement. And it's genuine people like Michael Rupert who actually were the foundation of the movement, especially to bring awareness to the truth about 9/11. Many of them dedicated so much of their life. Now, initially he was just fighting against the drug trafficking, but he went and saw how deep the rabbit hole goes, and he obviously he tried to spread this information. William Cooper was another one. So these are the kind of people we need to respect for their hard work. Because of them, we have a lot of this truth accessible to us. Because nobody else will tell you this. People will tell you little parts of the truth, maybe for whatever, maybe to run their radio show or whatever it is. They don't really care about the truth of the people. But people like Michael Rupert, clearly he did care. So we come to it. So without laying the foundation, as Mike Rupert did in his documentary, if I simply say now, the CIA was in Afghanistan to set up the heroin trade, and Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset and drug lord of Afghanistan. I've heard people respond to me many times. They may work to obfuscate the truth about the attacks on 9/11 by ridiculing the idea that the CIA in America would do such a thing. Oh, ridiculous. Are you crazy? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Oh, one of those crazy conspiracy theories. Let me now respond to that condescending, patronizing tone, that disgenuine criticism, with some convincing evidence. So the thing is, a lot of these people, they know there's something wrong there. They just don't want to investigate. In fact, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people in America itself have the attitude towards 9/11. So much so that towards conspiracy theories. If you heard Barack Obama mention this in his State of the Union address, we must not give in to conspiracy theories, something along those lines. He actually said that. I can find the video, but that has nothing to do with this paper in itself. I just wanted to say that, that mindset towards conspiracy theories. America has this attitude of, I don't want to find the skeletons in my brother's closet. That's kind of the attitude that America has towards investigating 9/11. People are afraid of what they're going to find. And that's why you get all this condescending, patronizing tone, mockery, disrespect, change the subject, talk over the person, do everything you can to obfuscate the truth. Or come to terms with the reality that in fact 9/11 was an inside job. So let's continue. Bear in mind that whatever I give you here in terms of evidence only scratches the surface, as the CIA and its drug operations is an entire research paper and project by itself, as I mentioned before. The foundation. In 1982, during the time of President Ronald Reagan, anyone who was less than a case officer in the CIA rank, even though he or she would still receive paychecks from the CIA, was regarded as a non-employee, so that the CIA would not have to report cases of narcotics and drug trafficking violations to the federal government, which was the normal requirement when someone from an intelligence agency is charged with a crime. See, obviously, if you're working in the government, any kind of crime, especially like drug trafficking, has to be reported to the federal government because you're an employee. You're in the CIA, and if you're committing crimes, that has to be reported to the federal government. But here, they weren't considered an employee of the CIA, so technically, they didn't have to report the crime to the federal government, because that would put the CIA in the spotlight. On 11th of February, 1982, in a letter written by the then Attorney General William French Smith to the then Director of Central Intelligence Agency at the CIA, William J. Casey, in order to protect agency drug operations, Smith expressed in this memorandum the federal government's intention to remain silent and offer leniency when CIA agents are caught in drug trafficking or narcotics violations, expressly due to the fine, quote-unquote, fine cooperation the Drug Enforcement Administration has received from the CIA. during its investigation into the drug smuggling. In the blog that I've included or linked to in this video, I've shown the picture, the PDF picture of this this particular excuse me, this particular letter. I've shown the picture here as well. You can read the letter if you want. Basically, I'm just summarizing here. That's essentially what it does here. This is the Attorney General saying, Michael Rupert will tell you first, okay, that's one thing the CIA did, is they made case officers non-employees. And then they got the Attorney General to work with them and basically say, hey, due to your fine cooperation with the Drug Enforcement Administration in our investigation of drug smuggling and narcotics violations, etc., we find no formal requirement. So basically they're saying it's not required for you, and if it's not required, why the hell would the CIA do? Especially if they're involved in drug smuggling, drug operations. Why would they go to the CIA and say, hey, yeah, this case officer committed drug violations. He's basically a drug trafficker. He's a drug pusher or whatever he is. Why would they do that? Why would they so Attorney General's saying, hey, wink, wink. You guys go ahead. Do your stuff. We're turning the other way. This is cooperation. This is colluding. Clear case of it. And they're in black and white. You can still see this letter to this very day. Now, I got it from a website called humanrightswatch.org, hrw.org, but you can probably find this elsewhere. But it's very important to understand that, of course, the Attorney General was involved with all of these guys. The CIA, they're all backing each other. They're involved in the drug trade. They're all complicit. Now, what happened after this, or during this time and beyond, for the next couple of years up to 1987? So from 1979 to 1987, U.S. cocaine consumption increased from 80 metric tons to 600 metric tons, all of which the CIA controlled. The legal initiatives taken by the CIA were in anticipation of this rise in trafficking and consumption, so that the police would not be bothersome and prevent this huge business that the CIA was getting into. Let's move to another example. Around 28 transport planes, Lockheed C-130 Hercules, like the one in the shown picture, were smuggled through the Forest Service into private hands, purportedly for the purpose of fighting forest fires. These planes were designed for military personnel transport, so transferring troops from one to the others, primarily a transport and cargo plane. So medical treatment personnel and equipment transport, like medevac, and in general cargo. So human cargo, medical equipment, that's what it's for. Transferring soldiers, transferring medical personnel to treat those soldiers, and for medevac. And for cargo. It's a great cargo plane, but it's not exactly a plane that's ideal for forest fights. So you can see the picture and you can see what it's really for. Check on yourself, what the Lockheed C-130 was all about, what type of plane it was. Multiple planes were reported to be running covert CIA operations across Central and South America in various countries, with pictures of their presences there from Mike Rupert's documentary film. Obviously, they weren't there to fight fires. In 1994, I know we're jumping back from 80s and 90s. It's just some of them, they're a little longer, and we're going to go step by step, doing my best to keep it in as chronological order as possible, but we're going to jump back from 80s, 90, 80, 90, that sort of thing. So some of these people, they were in the drug operations in the 80s, and then they became part of Wall Street in early 90s or something. They're all involved in Wall Street and the CIA. So we're going to get to that in a second. In 1994, when one of these C-130s was caught smuggling $1 billion of cocaine in Mexico City, in one of the communications from the Forest Service's lawyers. So remember, Forest Service was smuggled through the Forest Service. So the CIA and their drug operations and the government, they're all involved, and they're using the Forest Service purported to fight forest fires. And the Forest Service obviously was complicit to some degree, because they're not stupid. They also know the C-130s are not ideal for fighting forest fires. They knew that they were aiding in the drug operations and the drug smuggling. In one of the communications from the Forest Service lawyers, it was expressed that the Department of Defense wanted the Forest Service to take the fall. Exact quote, "Apparently, DOD thinks that by having the Forest Service as the intermediary, if any future aircraft are used in drug smuggling, the Forest Service and not DOD will suffer the adverse publicity." So understand what's going on here. They're all involved. They're all complicit at some level. They can't pretend that they're little children. They don't know. They all know. They all know exactly what's going on. But here the DOD, when they get caught, DOD is like, oh, well, it's the Forest Service. So the Forest Service are the ones who actually are handling the plane, supposedly, to fight fires. So who gets the rap? But the lawyer is saying, for the Forest Service, saying, hey, don't leave us out here to dry. Out to dry. I mean, it's you guys were involved as well. The DOD thinks that they can just leave us. So any few aircraft used in drug, we're the ones who take the fall. And they don't take any negative, adverse publicity. So they're all worried about their reputations, their careers, getting in trouble, the public finding out, thinking that there's corrupt agents in the DOD, or figuring out that the entire operations are done by CIA. So they just leave the Forest Service, take the fall. No one's really concerned about the morality or what's right and wrong. Is it okay for a government to be involved in drug operations in its own country? Especially when people are saying there's poison on the streets, and this has been going on in America. Socially speaking, domestically speaking, people are against drug trafficking, especially hardcore drugs. Against drugs who are selling crack to kids and these sort of things. People are against that. Generally speaking, it's considered immoral. Some people like marijuana or things like that, but most people will agree that heroin and cocaine, crack, these kinds of things are not good for people. And they don't want that poison. They don't want their children and their people turning into junkies. So people don't want the poison on their streets. Except the ones who are already addicted. So they'll say they want it, but they're junkies. They're addicted. So the point is, the people will make all that noise. But here, the government itself is involved in the drugs trafficking. There's no chance for them to remove the poison from the city, because they need that poison to keep fueling their economy. And here it's crystal clear over the course of these decades that of course the government was involved. In multiple departments. It's not like just the CIA was doing all by itself. No, they had help. Had cooperation. Attorney General, Forest Service, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, you name it. And take note of the fact that the Forest Service lawyer is not really denying the Forest Service involvement. They're all involved. They're just saying, hey, don't hang us out to dry here. You're involved too. Why are we the only ones taking the fall? The DOD just wants to use us as an intermediary, so if the planes get caught, then we get in trouble. And we have to face the public, whereas you just run off. But, it's crystal clear from here. There's no denial here. Just business as usual. Just another day. Of course everyone's drug smuggling. Everyone in the government, or at the higher-ups, they know. It's not breaking news for them. In the 1980s, a Wall Street lawyer and banker, former chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and former Secretary of Defense Clark McAdams Clifford, set up the BCCI, a money laundering bank whose activities were exposed and well known, especially by 1991, when Clifford was indicted due to BCCI's connections to Clifford's own bank, First American. Clifford's role in defrauding the Federal Reserve Board by concealing the role of BCCI in acquiring American banks. So yes, long sentence, I get it. Let me unwrap that a little bit. Around $12 billion went unaccounted for, and more than 1 million people lost money, most of them from the Third World and England. Clifford and his partner, Altman, were never punished. Eventually, the federal government lost interest in the case, although there was ample evidence to charge at least Clifford. I've given a link here to an article that goes into great detail about this whole affair, this Clark McAdams Clifford affair, BCCI. What it's all about. Website is law.jrank.org. So they're the ones who give you this article, JRank articles. They go into a lot of detail about this, so you can read that if you want. I just kind of summarized it, the main points. John Foster Dulles, and of course this is mentioned by Mike Rupert in his presentation. John Foster Dulles. So here we're talking about these CIA. This guy McAdams Clifford. Look at his Secretary of Defense. So he's in the government. He's working for the administration, chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and he's directly involved in Wall Street and drug smuggling. Let's move on to the next character. John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles taught Clark Clifford how to launder and, by extension, how to set up the BCCI. John Foster Dulles had been the Secretary of State under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. So another Secretary of State. And Alan Dulles had been the CIA DCI under President John F. Kennedy until he was fired during the Bay of Pigs incident for his alleged involvement in causing the operation to fail. So, just to remind you, John F. Kennedy was the president after Dwight D. Eisenhower. So both of them, one was Secretary of State, the other was Director of Central Intelligence at the CIA. The Dulles brothers both worked at Sullivan and Cromwell LLP, which is still the most powerful law firm on Wall Street. William J. Casey, the same person to whom the letter was sent from the Attorney General, basically saying, hey, go ahead, do all the drug trafficking you want. Use the case officers who are technically not your employees so that they don't have to report any of the crimes of the non-employees. Go ahead, Mr. Casey. So he was the Director of Central Intelligence under Reagan. Under Nixon, he became the chairman of the Security and Exchanges Commission, the SEC, the body responsible for investigating crimes in stock trading on Wall Street. Try to get the clear picture here. The guy who's getting special permission from the Attorney General in a clear black and white in the letter, basically saying, hey, you know, no problem. Your case officers who are technically non-employees in your CIA, call them, non-employees, and they don't have to report narcotics violations. It specifically mentioned that they don't have to report them. There's no formal requirement. That's what the letter said. That same William J. Casey, who was the Director of Central Intelligence under Reagan, now later under Nixon, he becomes the chairman of the Securities and Exchanges Commission. So he's the police. He's the Wall Street police. Now they're responsible for investigating crimes and stock trading on Wall Street. So if you commit a crime on Wall Street, if you work with some broker for some dirty deal, or you have insider trading, you get some information so you can make some money, you'll get caught, and the SEC will prosecute, or however it works exactly. They'll investigate, report it to police, or whatever the next steps are. You'll get in trouble. But the people at the top, they're protected. Their whole little circle is protected, especially because they're doing the drug operations, supposedly for country. But they're the ones who got the country hooked. America wasn't dependent upon drug trafficking prior to these people. So they get America, they integrate it into America's economy. Then eventually the economy becomes dependent. It's kind of like in Afghanistan, where initially, they weren't drug traffickers. They, not at that level. I mean, there were drug traffickers, but, it's not like everyone had an opium plant. So they removed all the... So once they got hooked to the more money, it's three times more money, I think they make $3,000 instead of $1,000. So they make 3 times the income from opium. So they invest in opium fields rather than wheat fields, corn fields, or whatever fields, whatever is suitable for the Afghani environment. But at least wheat fields, they certainly had that before. It's not good for the country in the long run, or in the short run. It's not good for the economy. I mean, it works for the economy for certain people, only the people at the top. So they're the police. They're the ones committing the crimes. They're the ones involved in the drug operations, and they're the police of the stock exchange. So when they're laundering money, they can cover that up. So they know what to cover it up. So if you, John Doe, go commit that crime and try to do insider trading, you're done. SEC will protect you, and you'll know there's a police, there's a body governing. But they can launder all the money they want, and they do. Now, this is also the same William Casey, who was alleged to be supplying arms, among other illegal acts, during the Iran-Contra affair to the enemy, but was never properly investigated for it. When they're the police and they're the investigators, who's going to investigate them? They're the same one committing the crime. Stanley Sporkin was a CIA general counsel who was also the director of the Division of Enforcement at the SEC back in the 70s and 80s. He testified during the William Casey investigations, quote unquote. David Doherty was the CIA general counsel after Sporkin, and in 2001 he became the executive vice president of enforcement for the New York Stock Exchange. 6 out of the first 7 deputy directors of intelligence came from Wall Street, from CIA. Deputy directors of intelligence at the CIA came from Wall Street. CIA hierarchy. Just to remind you of the CIA hierarchy, it's Director of Central Intelligence, DCI, Deputy Director of Intelligence, DDI, and then under that is the Executive Director of Intelligence. DCI, DDI. Obviously, we're going to use those abbreviations many times. Let's move forward from the 1980s to the 90s and early 21st century and look at the CIA and Wall Street connections. So continue with these connections, discuss them with the foundation of those connections back in the 80s, 90s, and now we're moving into, from the 80s mainly to the 90s and early 21st century. In 1996, in a Congress session held in a high school in Los Angeles, California, concerning allegations of a large group of African Americans and others that the CIA was pushing drugs, concerning allegations of a large group of African Americans and others that the CIA was pushing drugs into their communities. Michael Rupert, a veteran A-grade LAPD narcotics officer, confirmed that the CIA had been dealing drugs for a long time in the country. He also alleged that he tried to get this information out prior, but he was shot at and forced out of the LAPD because of it. I suggest you watch his video documentary if you have not already done so. At least that part, you can see that somewhere. That's at the beginning of the video documentary, but you can also find that on the internet as well. His exchange with the, I believe it was the Director of Central Intelligence at the CIA, John Deutsch. I think so. At that time, I forgot what his position was, but he was definitely in a maybe it was a CIA executive director. I actually forgot what his position was. Probably was a DCI. A.B. Buzzy Krongard was until 1998 the head of an investment bank called A.B. Brown. A.B. Brown was linked to insider trading connected to the attacks on September 11th, 2001, and after the attacks, he became the CIA executive director. The executive director of intelligence at the CIA. From an Associated Press story dated June 27th, 1999. The SEC chief and chairman and chief executive of the New York Stock Exchange from 1995 to 2003, Richard Dick Grasso, visited the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, guerrillas, who controlled 1/3 of Colombia and of course taxed the cocaine smuggling in their areas. And he asked them to invest in Wall Street. He obviously knows how they make their money, and it just shows the desperation of the CIA and Wall Street, how integral money laundering, or rather drug smuggling, is to their financial setup, and of course the money laundering that accompanies it. Around 2004, the IMF published a study stating that $1.5 trillion is laundered through the world banking system. $500 to $600 billion of that is from drug trafficking, says the U.S. Department of Justice. Reported by the Washington Post on the 5th of February 2001, Senator Carl Levine of Michigan, in his minority report to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, gave testimony to the rampant money laundering and disinterest on the part of the U.S. government in preventing it. He confirmed that it is around $500 billion that moves through the U.S. banking system every year. He mentioned J.P. Morgan Chase and 4,000 offshore banks that launder $1 trillion annually to U.S. banks. We're getting even more clear pictures of how conservative our estimates on money laundering, tax evasion, government corruption, and illegal trafficking are with the recent Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, and other financial document leaks exposing powerful businessmen, politicians, and even celebrities. Basically anyone rich, anyone who is super rich and has money to send to offshore accounts, offshore banks, is doing it, and mainly for tax evasion, but sometimes there's drug trafficking involved as well. But there's definitely money. That's when it's called money laundering, when you have dirty money and you launder it to a business or something else, or to banks to make it look like clean money, like you earned it, and you save that money up or whatever. It's your capital. Sorry, it's your wealth. Or you buy stock with it as part of your wealth. Stock of something, I don't know, 1,000 refrigerators, or 1,000 this, 1,000 that, whatever. However it's done, depending on the case. Or buying mansions or something on an island or something, whatever, from those offshore accounts. However it's done, depending on the person and how they're. But basically here you see these figures coming. $1.5 trillion laundered. Could be $2 trillion. Could be we talked about the estimated black market, $2 trillion. It could be $5 trillion. Could be $10 trillion. This is just what's found, what's laundered. All of the money that people make illegally is not laundered through some bank, and that's assuming you found everything that's laundered. Maybe there's laundering that's going on and you don't realize it. So $2 trillion is just. But here's some of those facts. You see those IMF confirming it, Department of Justice, and $1 trillion goes to U.S. banks only. That doesn't include other countries' banks. So banking system heavily involved in money laundering. There has to be support from the financial and legal side. And we've seen both. Financial and legal side support to keep the drug operations going. Because you can't keep all these things a secret for very long. Someone's going to find out. In June 2000, the then Attorney General Janet Reno and the then Deputy Treasury Secretary Stuart E. Eisenstadt called some corporations to a drug money laundering conference where the press was neither invited nor allowed. 20 people were invited to represent their companies. Amongst a list of corporations that were invited to this private, quiet meeting include big names like Hewlett-Packard, Sony, General Motors, Whirlpool, General Electric, and Philip Morris. These specific corporations were invited because there were reports of their products being bought with quote-unquote black pesos in Colombia and other locations in Central and South America. were asked to tone their money laundering down, not to stop it. Basically, these specific ones, there were reports. They had to do something. The government had to show, hey, we're trying to talk to these companies. Protect yourself from money laundering, as if that's the way they had to play it. But in fact, they were there to just tell them, hey, calm down, we're going to get caught. Don't do this much money laundering. Cool it down. So they were there to basically tell these companies, tone your money laundering down. But all of these companies had reports in these Central and South, or reports from the people, that people were buying their products, or companies or big names or drug dealers were buying their products with their black pesos. So basically they're money laundering. They were laundering their money. They're buying stocks and options, that sort of thing, into these big companies from that drug money. Money laundering, using Wall Street to launder the money. It's all drug money. Use it to buy stock options. The money's been cleaned. It's been laundered through Wall Street. So just one example of how it would be done. You can buy stocks. You can buy inventory perhaps, but mostly it would be stocks. It's through Wall Street. So products are being bought with black pesos in Colombia. Stocks and products, call it whatever you want. Investing into the company with black pesos, with drug money. And that's why these specific companies were brought, because they had reports against them. They had to do something. This was just the illusion of due diligence. That's all it was. But in reality, it was just them telling them, hey, tone your money laundering down. And of course, I've given a link to an article here. It's from pbs.org. It's called U.S. Business and Money Laundering by Oriana Zill and Lowell Bergman. This is... I don't have a date stamp on this, but even regardless, this was back in 2000, so the article was written probably somewhere around there. But this is from pbs.org. You can see the link in the blog. So you go to the blog and get to this part of it, this part of the foundation. If you're following along with that, then you can see the link there, pbs.org, and the full link is there. So a very important piece of evidence. The Attorney General and the Deputy Treasury Secretary are both calling them for a drug money laundering conference, where basically they're telling, hey, tone your money laundering down. And of course, no money laundering stopped. It's not like the drug trade stopped. No, it only keeps on picking up. Former DCI John Deutsch, the same Deutsch that confronted Michael Rupert under President Bill Clinton, landed himself in 2001 on the board of Citibank, along with Robert Rubin, who was the Secretary of the Treasury during the Clinton administration. I mentioned Citibank because in May 2001, Citibank announced a $12 million purchase of the second largest Mexican bank, Banco Nacional de Mexico, better known as Banamex, which is still owned by Citigroup to this very day. Roberto Hernandez Ramirez, former CEO of Banamex, while it was under fire for its links to money laundering, got a seat on the board of Citibank even though he had drugs confiscated on his land and lost 2 lawsuits in Mexico. This news was all over Mexico, and of course Citibank knew about it. Citibank's money laundering has been well documented by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. So John Deutsch, or whatever, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, was the former director of Central Intelligence for the CIA. And in 2001, I think he was meant to be appointed to something in Clinton's administration, but he didn't get that because of, I think, Michael Rupert said he cost him that appointment. Well, regardless, he still got a seat on the board of Citibank. So all of these Wall Street CIA connections, you see that they're all working together. They support each other, and of course they get jobs after they retire from the CIA, or vice versa. They started in the bank, then they go to the CIA. Essentially, they come from Wall Street, they go to the CIA, or they go work in the CIA, and then retire in Wall Street, or work with banks that are involved in drug trafficking, money laundering. So, biggest bank in Mexico, second largest bank in Mexico, big money laundering bank, bought out by Citibank. Around this time, really at any time, $4.4 trillion of adjustments had to be made in the Pentagon accounts to settle them, and $1.1 trillion of that could not be supported by any reliable information. The Department of Defense could not account for $1.1 trillion of defense contractors because of their quote-unquote tangled system of accounting. While this deals with corruption in national defense spending and not drug trafficking directly, it is still quite telling of the state of accounts kept at this level when government officials want to hide the money trail. Certain groups are exempt from making currency transaction reports to the U.S. Treasury Department, regardless of how suspicious law enforcement is of the illegality of those transactions. Amongst these groups are a bank, a U.S. government department or agency, a U.S. state entity, or a listed entity other than a bank whose common stock or analogous equity interests are based on the New York Stock Exchange, American Stock Exchange, or are designated as a NASDAQ national market security. Now, I'm not a finance guy, so some of these terms are a little complicated for me. But bottom line is, you see that these banks, government agencies, they don't have to report any suspicious, like basically they're supporting money laundering here. Something is suspicious, illegal transaction, they don't have to report it. Now, I don't think things changed too much after 9/11. It did for you and me. So if you transfer to a relative a large amount, especially internationally, well, that's going to raise some alarms. Sometimes it's not allowed, that kind of transaction, because why are you sending that much money? Regardless, whatever it is, I mean, you could get in trouble, or you'd at least have to have answer questions. You make a suspicious transaction, you're going to answer for it. Whether you're completely innocent doesn't matter. And usually, little people are. The common person is. But these money launderers, drug traffickers, the government who is involved in that, they have rules in the system to protect themselves, so they don't have to report any of this. So they can do all kinds of suspicious stuff they want. They're not required by law to report. Now, if there's some clear illegality, but they're not going to check it out. So basically, the illegality has to just fall into their lap when it comes to money laundering, or someone has to get caught, or the whole thing has to be blown wide open. That's the only way anyone's ever going to get caught. Otherwise, they're not going to tell anyone. Because they have rules protecting each other. Like this one, where they don't have to report anything to the Treasury Department. And that's one of the reasons why all these accounts are all screwed up. $4.4 trillion of adjustments, and then $1.1 trillion that could not be supported by any reliable information. This essentially means that Wall Street could launder all the money it wants to. As far as how money is laundered, there are a myriad of ways. I mentioned some of them earlier, but kind of summarize them here. It can be done through a legitimate company that operates, so-called legitimate company that operates, but there is no justification for the capital that it has, like the Italian mafia owning a family restaurant that acts as a business front for their legal money. So they're selling pizza and pasta, but really they're not making the money that they're making from the pizza and pasta. That's just a front for their real business, which is thuggery, drugs, theft, whatever. It can be done through offshore accounts using names of people that don't exist, like Mr. X, Mr. Y, etc. But the owners of these accounts still have access to the money. It can be done by purchasing significant stocks through dummy corporations, stock brokerage firms, etc. However, regardless of how it is done, the one thing that is required is cooperation from the legal and financial side. When the government facilitates drug trafficking and money laundering, then of course it will happen. To set up offshore accounts where you can still access the money, you need finance experts who know which tax havens to store the money in and how to set those accounts. To launder money through Wall Street, especially for non-American drug lords, the laws have to be set up to facilitate this money laundering, and you need the finance experts, the money laundering banks or brokerage firms, to set everything up for for you as an individual, or for Mr. Drug Dealer X, Mr. Drug Dealer Y, whatever. I mean, you need You need someone who knows how to work that finance system to launder your money. So when some drug dealer wants to launder money into the American system so it's clean, quote unquote, and America wants that money, and you see the what's his name I mentioned before, he went to meet the FARC guerrillas. Who was that? Richard Dick Grosso, mentioned earlier. He visited the FARC guerrillas in Colombia, who own 1/3 of Colombia, and basically tell them to invest in Wall Street. And many of them did. You have the report from where Janet Reno had to call these companies in and say, hey, tone down your money laundering. Countless pieces of evidence. And again, this is a project in and of itself to prove that the long list of CIA and American government drug operations, how false America's war on drugs really is. America itself has an interest in keeping the drug operation going. Now, we move to the next part. America's dependence upon drug trafficking. To the uninformed, it seems crazy to suggest that the CIA went into Afghanistan in part to establish the heroine trade. But when you look at all the facts, the long history of CIA's drug trafficking, money laundering through Wall Street, and the aid from politicians and law enforcement agencies, it doesn't seem far-fetched at all, but rather just part of the CIA's modus operandi. We humans are habit-forming creatures, and the CIA is just used to this, and so are all of Wall Street. DC and law enforcement who are either getting their cut or staying silent so as not to invoke the wrath of powerful people who could sabotage their careers. It has been alleged by African American communities that the CIA only targets black people in America to corrupt their neighborhoods and keep them down, preventing them from succeeding in life and moving forward as a race. It has been alleged that the CIA deals in drugs to fund black ops. While these allegations are not entirely without merit, the main reason why the CIA deals drugs, why Wall Street participates, and why the government helps is that it has become an integral part of the U.S. economic and financial system. Sure, the American government could find ways of fixing its financial system so that it's not dependent upon endless war and drug trafficking to keep it afloat, but that would require completely revamping the system. A determination to live morally, faith in God, that prosperity does come to those who make a living honestly, and removing American dependency upon Wall Street's financial opportunities. Those who benefit from Wall Street in the form of mutual funds, interest growth, call or put options, or other derivatives and gambling are all dependent upon drug trafficking and endless war for their profit. Until the financial system is completely re-engineered, this reality won't change. In the meanwhile, the cultural effect on America is absolutely disastrous, but Wall Street has incentivized Americans to keep this dirty system going. No matter how unreal the dream is or how many people lose money, the Enron scandal, fraudulent brokerages, insider trading, just to name a few examples. I mean, you can the little people, the typical people, don't really make money, not the good money that they make. So this is really just for drug dealers. The whole thing is a sham. It's a fraud. It's a false promise. You, the little people, will never make money. Not the kind of money these people are making. You may get lucky every now and then and get some money, get some profits, and you think, oh, okay. But that's the way the gambler is. Like, he has to win something for him to keep pouring coins into the slot machine. They got to get him addicted. Say, hey, there's a chance you can win. Or you can fix the system, or you can learn how to cheat the slot system. Well, you're not going to cheat the cheater. The cheater knows how to cheat better than you. The house will always win. The sad reality is that you, the average person, can easily lose money in Wall Street. All your savings, everything you work for 30 years, 40 years. But the CIA and major corporations will always find a way to make profit because the system is rigged for them. From this lens, after having been informed, for the initiated, looking at the facts of the CIA's long history of drug operations and money laundering through Wall Street, is it really so crazy to suggest that the CIA went into Afghanistan to deal drugs, to set up the heroin trade? If you remember the film The Usual Suspects, you'll recall a scene where Kaiser Soze's lawyer, Kobayashi, says that Mr. Soze's primary interest is in narcotics. Just replace Mr. Soze with the CIA. Now, in the way of proof, directly as it relates to Afghanistan, what was the CIA doing in Afghanistan as it relates to drugs? Besides the involvement of the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden. I'm going to get into that a little later in this paper, in the next section of this War in Afghanistan sub-series, called Western Hegemony. In that it is quite long. Maybe it's going to be 4 parts, or 4 videos, 3 videos at least. I don't know. We'll see. And in one of those, I mentioned Osama bin Laden. Who Osama bin Laden was, what was he doing, the 20-year, that was before the 20-year Afghanistan war, America's war. That was during the Soviet Union's occupation, attempted occupation in Afghanistan. So, sure, I've heard pieces of evidence here and there. You're not going to find this in any kind of a mainstream news outlet. You're not going to find it in newspapers. It's not going to be there in the mainstream. It's just going to be rumors. Somebody said this. You trust this person. That source. It's not going to be someone openly saying, yeah, I saw Osama bin Laden doing drugs, and I know he was with the drug lords, and he met up with them at the behest of the CIA, and he was an agent of the CIA. All of this stuff is just going to be... It's just going to be theories, conjecture, claims, rumors. It's not going to be evidence that we can support, but it is something to be considered. So I'll mention this in this section, subsection rather. I'm going to call this the military-industrial complex and heroin production in Afghanistan. So let's now look at an interview conducted by RT's Chris Hedges of the retired Major Daniel A. Sorensen, a West Point graduate who was stationed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and discusses why and how America's war in Afghanistan failed so badly. The name of the program is called On Contact: The Debacle in Afghanistan. So Chris Hedges of RT is interviewing this retired major, Daniel A. Sorensen. While we'll discuss this in detail later on as it relates to drug trafficking, Danny Sorensen, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, mentions that his senior officials, colonels, brigadiers, generals, etc., and his Northern Alliance allies own some of the biggest opium poppy fields in Afghanistan, using the poor Afghani farmers as their slaves to work the fields. This money was obviously funneled back to America, stashed in the pockets of the officers, and made the dishonorable Northern Alliance thugs rich. Danny Sorensen is an honorable American soldier who was appalled by and ashamed of America's wars, including the one in Afghanistan. He also fought in the Iraq War as well. I believe he went to the Iraq War first and then came to Afghanistan later. But we'll get into the detail of it later in this paper, in the next main section of this paper called Western Hegemony. This War in Afghanistan paper. While this testimony is important as evidence, and it's just one person on the ground, there's countless others. It's just one that I found and one that I liked. I really liked his overall summary of the whole situation. While his testimony is important as evidence, and there are countless others whose testimony you may have heard on a personal level or through some media. So maybe you heard it on some channel, maybe it was some interview, or maybe you know someone. Maybe someone served time in Afghanistan or Iraq, Syria, whatever, and you know what's going on the ground there. They'll come back and tell you the lies that the government's telling, the media is telling. I think the most convincing proof of America's involvement in setting up the heroin trade in Afghanistan is the fact that the heroin export didn't exist until America got involved. It's the ties between the CIA and Osama bin Laden. It's the whole history of the war on terrorism. It's the war profiteering of the military-industrial complex. It's the intricate planning of America's top geopolitical strategist. In fact, we cannot really understand America's interests in the region in full until we discuss these concepts. So let's get to it. And now we're going to get to that in the next section, the Western hegemony. So I'm just going to setting that section up. So we've discussed the main big interest why America was in Afghanistan. So mineral wealth of Afghanistan, oil and gas of Kazakhstan, and obviously the pipelines that have to run through Afghanistan. Control over this region will help you get access to that oil and gas. And drugs, heroine trade. So these are main reasons why America was there. And of course, then we get into the war profiteering, the military-industrial complex, what their angle is. It's really a long background. I give as much background as I can here to get you to understand what's really going on and how you really understand all of these interests. Kind of wrap it in, and of course the endless war machine. So we're going to get to that in the next section. Like I said, it could be 4 parts, but this is it for the drug section. The point of this is just, again, as I mentioned before, to prove that the CIA's long list of operations, it's much more involved than anything I could put in a little paper and put on YouTube as a video. This is, like I said, it's a project of its own. And then on top of that, to get into the details, to make it more convincing, the CIA was in fact in Afghanistan in part because of the heroin trade. We have to get into some of this background, the Western hegemony. But like I said, testimonies of this soldier, that soldier, they mean something. They're worth something. People on the ground who have an interest to just shut up and go along with the lies told to them. But they did that. They did that for a while, then they got tired of it. So they're going against America's interest and saying no. Well, at least the Zionist interest, and saying, hey, no, I'm against this war. This war was a big waste. It was a big mistake. We didn't accomplish anything. And we weren't even there for any good reason. We were there for oil and gas. We were there for mineral wealth. We were there to thwart China and Russia's influence and economies, cripple their economies, make them beg for oil and gas, especially China, who had that crisis, still has that oil and gas crisis and energy crisis. So they will tell you all of that. They'll give you more details about all of that. But of course, like I said, to get all that convincing proof of America's involvement in setting up the heroin trade, you have to look at the whole big picture. Ties between the CIA and who was in Osama bin Laden. I'm going to get into a little bit of that history. I'm not going to get into a full report, biography of Osama bin Laden, but just some basics of who he was and how he fit into this whole story. How he fit into the war in Afghanistan. Because the war in Afghanistan was a big part of his career, if you want to call it that. The whole history of the war on terrorism, where it started, what was it all about. The war profiteering of the military-industrial complex. We're going to get into all the generals who made countless profits while American economy was hemorrhaging, and the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. In the richest country of the world, people are not feeling like they're a superpower. They don't feel powerful. They feel helpless. They feel poor. So we're going to get into all of these big generals making tons and tons of money, military-industrial complex, making trillions of dollars, charging American dollars, American tax dollars for these wars, and sending those Americans to fight. Pissed off Taliban, pissed off other people. Groups, this terrorist, that terrorist, who's pissed off that you're in his country, and he wants to blow you up. Facing the wrath of really pissed off people. Little kids who don't know what the hell they're getting into. What kind of people they're going to fight. Bitter, embittered people. Angry people. While the big generals who have the most experience, who have the technology, who have the know-how, they're making trillions of dollars. So we're going to get into all of that. You have to look at that big picture. And we'll tie it all in. So I'll do that in the next video. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video. I hope it was informative, and if there's anything I can do to improve these videos, to improve the facts, if there's anything incorrect, a mistake, false fact, whatever you think there's something false about anything I've said, share with me in the comments, and I'll try to improve the video if I think your criticism is fair. and genuine, absolutely. I'll look to improve the video, make sure there's nothing inaccurate. Forget false. Nothing inaccurate in my paper or my claims at all. I want this to be as convincing and truthful as possible. Thank you for listening. This has been The Unwilling Pawn.